This program is part of the Devil's Mark Podcast Network, the official podcast network of Shadow Path Diabolism.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast episode for Sunday, September 27th, 2020. On today's episode, I'm going to be answering a question that comes from Simon, who asked some questions about the nature of demonic spirits, and also how often should you ask for them to reveal themselves to you or ask for things from Satan and the demons. And I'm going to try to answer that question today on this episode.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast, the official podcast of Shadow Path Diabolism, your daily dose of Diabolonian philosophy to inspire you on your journey down the crooked shadow path. Here's your host, R.J. Womack, Brother Nero.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for this episode of the podcast. As always, I'm your host, R.J. Womack, aka Brother Nero, and this is the Dark Illumination Report podcast, the podcast where we promote the serious religious worship of Satan and demons as a serious faith and way of life, and we try to help our fellow diabolists on their personal journey down the crooked shadow path. And on today's episode, I'm going to be answering a couple of questions from Simon, or addressing a few issues for Simon to help him understand some of the issues or some of the things that have been happening to him. And hopefully this will help some others along the way. Now, the first question that Simon asked is, how often should I ask for Satan to manifest himself or do things for me? Well, I don't have a specific answer for that question because I think everybody's individual relationship is just that, individual. And I think if Satan or the other demonic spirits get annoyed with you for asking for too much proof or asking for too much from them, they will let you know. So that's kind of an issue you have to deal with on your own. Now, the second thing I would say to you is the things that you're talking about, the coincidences, the strange occurrences, the circumstances that you're having are very common for people just getting connected with Satan and demons, and it happens quite a lot. Now, the problem with these kind of coincidences or serendipities or whatever you want to call them is that they can often be seen as coincidences. They can often make people believe that they're having some kind of mental illness or having some kind of issue, mental issue. And it could be easily seen that way. So what I would say is be very careful about your assessment of these things. Kind of keep an open mind about it, but also remember that you could be doing some wishful thinking on your own part, because you want contact so much. But if it follows the normal pattern, they should get more intense. They should happen more often, and it should become quite obvious that something unusual is going on. That's typically what happens in these circumstances. The other thing I would mention too is that if it's a true demonic manifestation, you will also, if you start to have people involved with you, you will start to see these things happen with other people around as well. That's the main difference between some of the idea of it being a coincidence and some of the ideas that it might be a psychological issue, is that when these things start to happen, if it's truly demonic or spiritual, they tend to start happening around other people, and other people start experiencing similar things. That's a very distinct, very obvious distinction between spiritual manifestation and, say, coincidence or psychological disorder. The other thing is that you have to understand that people have a very false idea of the nature of demons. A lot of what they think the demons are like comes from Hollywood, comes from listening to too much black metal or whatever. And it's really not the way they operate. I'll give you an example. They do use people to communicate messages to you. They'll use strangers. They will use people that you come across to communicate messages to you. And in fact, they have the ability to use people without people knowing they're being used. And in fact, they can even manifest quite dramatically, and the people don't even seem to be aware that they're manifesting and communicating through them. They have the ability to to mask their presence and use people without them even knowing it. And I don't know how that works, and I can't explain how they do it, but it is very obvious. I've seen it with friends of mine. I've seen it in around groups of people where people will randomly say stuff that is only known to the members of the coven, and it's just a stranger walking down the street, or it's even a doctor or a nurse will say something very strange in answer to a prayer or to a question. So it is very possible for them to use people without them knowing that they're being used by the spirits. Another thing that is very characteristic of demonic spirits is that they can change the degree to which they manifest in people. Like, they can be very subtle. Their presence can be there, and they can be communicating through someone without anyone being the wiser except the person receiving the message. And then they can manifest to the point where it's very obvious that you have a demonic communication. And they can adjust the level of their manifestation at will. So you can have a person who's communicating message to you, and it's not very obvious to anyone other than you or people around you who know how the demons work that they're communicating a message through you, through that person. But then you can have a person who has a manifestation to the point where their facial structure can change, their eye color can change. You can have all kinds of different levels of manifestation. And the demons have the ability to kind of come forward and then pull back. And they can do that at will, and they can do it whenever they want to. So they can adjust the level at which they manifest within someone to make their presence known. And another thing I want to point out here is that they also very rarely manifest in a truly supernatural way. They don't need to. They use people in a way that they don't have to use that kind of energy. It's very easy for them to communicate through people when they want to. It's very easy for them to communicate telepathically and influence people's natural behavior in such a way that is so subtle that they very rarely realize how much they're being used by a demonic spirit. So if you do actually get a paranormal manifestation, it's a rare thing, and it should be seen as a privilege and an honor, not something that should be expected, because they don't really need to do it. If they want to communicate with you, they can communicate with you through much more subtle means than having a manifestation happen. But again, when you do have something happen that's truly paranormal, and that you have your friends seeing it as well, or people that you're working with in a spiritual way, it should be seen as a privilege and an honor, and something that should be respected and not taken for granted. And unfortunately, we live in a society where people are more worried about, seeing supernatural stuff than actually worshiping the demons and communicating with them. You should be grateful that they communicate with you at all, regardless of how they do it, much less expect it and expect them to prove themselves to you. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't prove themselves to you. In fact, many people will tell you that they prayed to many other gods before they prayed to Satan. And as soon as they prayed to Satan, they got an answer. So a lot of people have found that to be their personal experience, that when they prayed to other gods, they didn't get a response very quickly. But when they prayed to Satan or the demons, they tended to get a response pretty quickly. Now, there have been other people who have had the opposite experience, but like I said, typically they do respond quickly if they want to work with you. And if they don't respond quickly, it may be an indication that they don't believe you're genuine in your devotion to them, and there may be a problem there. I can't speak for them, but that's what I've seen in my experience, is that when they don't respond to people, or they seem reluctant to respond to people, there's usually a reason behind it. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope that helps. Take care of yourself, everybody. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
If you would like to learn more about the Shadow Path Diabolism tradition of occultism, go to rjwomack.com. That's rjwomack.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and support our message, tell a friend, leave us a review, and follow us on social media.